My name's Glen Morgan, and this is We the Governed. And welcome to our first live streaming event. This is the first time I've ever hosted one of these. I think I've been on a couple of them before the other people have hosted, but the first time I've ever been responsible for hosting one of these. So if there's any technical glitches, we had a couple just getting started here. Hopefully you can hear me now, and do make comments down below if you're having any trouble with hearing what I'm saying. Judging from the number of questions that have come in, I figure there's a number of people that are online right now, and it looks like there's a number of people that have already sent questions in as well. So just as a quick reminder, in case you're watching this video and it's not March 8th, 2022, that means this was filmed live, but you're watching it after we already filmed it. So you can still add questions down in the video comment section down below. I'm pretty good at getting back to those, but in case you're wondering why I'm interacting in a certain way, it's because this is filmed live, and so I'm mainly going to try to address the questions that people ask me while I'm sitting down here and doing this live stream. So I do appreciate everybody that signed up. I know there's a number of people that are watching right now. And since I did say it's Ask Me Anything, I got all kinds. I'm already getting all kinds of questions. So I'll do my best to see if I can answer those and get on top of it here. Now, the first one that I did get, early bird, was Kodiak Girl, who basically had a video or had a question here where she said, I heard Inslee declined the receipt of over 30,000 legal affidavits from Washington state residents demanding freedom from medical tyranny and full forensic audit of the 2020 elections. And that is true. You heard correct. Kodiak Girl, you heard correct. That is exactly what happened last Friday. There was a group that was organized collecting all of these affidavits. And in fact, there's a Gateway Pundit article about it that I'll post up on the screen here right now so you can actually see it. It's worth finding this article and looking at it. There's a TikTok video linked in it if you want to just see what it was like when they went to deliver these affidavits. There's boxes of them. 30,000 is actually quite a few. And so you can kind of get a sense of what it was like when you go look at this video and you read the article there. The interesting thing about it really was that Inslee refused service, the Attorney General refused service, both state senators refused service, and the federal senators, and then Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck accepted service. The others claimed that they were worried about bombs or whatever their issues are, excuse of the day. But that is what happened. So you were well informed. That did happen, and where it goes from here is going to be up to the Tea Room folk that did all the work collecting those. Sounds like they have a few other projects in store for our governor and our political leadership, so we'll see what they have to say as well. Now, I also had three different questions that came in right in the beginning. One of them is from Ben, and the question is, what new restrictions does our governor have in store for us? And Ben, I can't answer that exactly. Inslee is a little unpredictable, but I'm sure he has a lot that he'd love to impose on us. But Inslee, after all, is just following the science. And I guess when I say science, I'm really talking about political science. And even a Democrat can read the polls and see that they're not, a lot of people around Washington say they're not too happy, including a lot of people who self-identify as Democrats right now. And that basically means the governor's going to probably avoid imposing any new restrictions, at least between now and November, hoping to discourage an angry electorate from throwing out a lot of incumbent Democrats. And so I would expect that he probably doesn't do anything between now and December. Now, the real thing to watch here, of course, is Inslee's just grabbed onto these powers, these emergency powers, and he's not going to let go. I mean, you're going to have to pull his fingers off and get him to release his emergency control. And so he's really enjoying that. So even if he lifts the restrictions, he's still keeping this eternal state of emergency that we've talked about now on this show for several years. And so I'm not aware of any other restrictions that he'll impose, but I'm sure give him a chance and he'll come up with some excuse. I have another question from Nikolai here. Question of wokeism and how it grows and collapses. I don't talk so much about wokeism, but certainly the political correctness that goes along with it. And I'll give you an example of why I think some elements of wokeism are just going to have to collapse under their own weight before too long. I sent a couple people up to go to meetings, Democrat meetings up north. I do that actually on a regular basis. And they went into this meeting, they're reporting back to me, and they said they spent the first 20 minutes of this meeting sorting out everybody's pronouns, presuming some people had changed their pronouns from the last time they had it. And keeping track of pronouns is a high priority at most Democrat functions, at least on the west side of the state. And then they had a 30-minute argument over who misgendered who or screwed up on the pronouns of somebody else. And apparently it was an ongoing social media fight internal to the group. So you had to sit through an hour of this before you could even get to any productive activity. Now that's wokeism gone amok. That's ineffective. Most normal people are going to think that's pretty crazy. And so I don't, I can't see how you can function too long if that's how you're operating as an organization. But then again, they've surprised me by lasting as long as they have. After all, the Evergreen State College is still in existence. So it may be half the size that it was a few years ago, but it's still going along. So wokeism probably still has a little ways to go, but it's going to collapse under its own might, just under its own weight and just lack of sanity, I think, at some point in time. Then I had a question from Siggy80 here. Geopolitically, tactically, or just because we're closer than the rest of the U.S., barring Alaska, with what's going on in Ukraine, do you think we have much to worry about here from the Russian Federation? And I'm presuming that question has to do with the potential for a nuclear attack or something like that. I mean, God help us. Let's hope nothing like that happens. But if you're wondering if Washington State would be in the target list of some kind of nuclear exchange between Russia and the U.S., absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, there's about 7 or 8, depending on how you count joint Fort Lewis, McChord Air Force Base, but there's quite a few military bases here that would be targeted alone, and that doesn't include oil refineries or dams or something else. Or frankly, with quality control being what it is for the Russians, who knows if their missiles would even get to the target, and they might hit any place really in the country. Let's just hope it doesn't get to that. This is terrifying, really, when you think about it. As somebody who grew up in the Cold War, even having that kind of a conversation right now is a bit disturbing, and we are in perilous times when those are the kind of conversations that we're having in the political process. So let me get to some of the questions that people are probably putting in here right now. There's a lot, so I'm just going to try to stay on top of some of these. Hello from Auburn, Shatona. So good to see you. Auburn's always a great place. And there was a question that I saw in here. Seeing history play out before my eyes. Well, that's not really a question, but Danielle, I appreciate that. You put in some other comments there. Let's see. Somebody said they have questions, so go ahead and post them up here. And King County is big. Which side of King County? South King. You're asking where somebody else lives. Okay. That's funny. Thurston County commissioners shut down rent assistance when they found $86,000 in fraud, but no one at state shut down unemployment securities when $1 billion worth of fraud was found. This is eyes wide open question. Why and the politics of it? This is a great question, actually. And they're right. Thurston County did shut down some of their programs when they discovered $86,000 in fraud, which is amazing because Thurston County is pretty incompetent. The bureaucrats certainly who work there are. And so it's very rare that they would even catch fraud, and that even if they do catch it, to shut down. So the fact that the Employment Security Department in Washington State lost almost $1 billion, that was and didn't they turned off all security functions and just let it go. Somebody on the inside did that, and to this day nobody's been held accountable. I mean, $1 billion disappears, and even in Washington State that's sort of real money, and so to have it just vanish and blame it on a Nigerian fraud scheme is pretty absurd. It's still one of the more absurd stories in Washington State, particularly considering that you got the FBI supposedly that are involved. You might have the Treasury Department probably involved, so at least the feds in whatever nominal capacity and skills they have are kind of involved in looking into it. You have the state auditor's office, which was actually kept out of the investigation originally, although I'm not sure if they've sent the A squad over to look at it and see what's happening right now. And it is exceptionally absurd and totally out of line that nobody to this day has been held accountable. And in particular, when you had the director of the Employment Security Department ended up getting hired by the Inslee administration to go run the same department at a federal level because I guess Washington State was a JV squad and she might as well go pro, where you can lose billions every day and nobody notices. So that's a pretty ridiculous thing, but that's what happened. Now, for whatever reason, she's left that job and come back to Washington State, which is just also just a continuation of the theater of the absurd. in Washington. So I don't know how to answer that or explain it, but that's what's going on there. And there is no good excuse. Politics is probably part of it, where the best thing to do when they come across a scandal is bury it. And that's how government usually operates, is cover up the scandals so that nobody knows about what's going on. Just a quick reminder, too, if you're just checking in on the video, this is a live stream right now. You can put your comments in the side there, and I'll try to get to them here as I'm working through them right now. And again, if you're just checking in this video and you've skipped ahead, this was filmed live on March 8th. So if it's no longer live and it's not March 8th, you can add your comments below and I'll respond to those there. Let's see, what do we have here? A lot of this is just commentary back and forth with other people. Let's see. I want to know which... Okay, this is Sofa King Cool. And I want to know which politicians voted against suspending the state gas tax today. Could have saved at least 50 cents a gallon. Yeah, that's a good point. I'd like to know who voted for that as well. That was actually a great proposal to see if they would be willing to suspend the state gas tax. Frankly, that's less money than the gas was just raised last week. But my guess is that most of the establishment folk voted against that. And, that's where we're at, with certainly a much higher gas tax and just the price at the pump in general is just so much higher. And, of course, that doesn't mean anything if you're super wealthy and you don't really care, but it's going to mean something to regular people who have jobs and need to get around. Increasing the cost of living that much is really, really dramatic. There's a question here from author S.A. Stacy. Will you do another activism training soon? That's a great question. My plan is to do them actually frequently over the next 6 months at least. I used to do activism training when I worked at the Freedom Foundation, and so I did. I'm pretty comfortable with doing those. I like to do activism training. What's different about what I'm doing now is I'm pretty focused on teaching people some very specific skill sets: how to use the Public Records Act, how to use the Public Disclosure Commission, how to file complaints with the PDC, how to do petitions to change a rule, how to file initiatives, when it makes sense, when and when not to use litigation, just the process you go through thinking about it, how to do videos, how to set up a website, how to do innovative activism, basic stuff. And it isn't so that I wouldn't anticipate people do everything. The point of it is to kind of provide an a la carte menu option so that if you're an activist and you don't know what to do, first of all, we got an election coming up. I would recommend you get involved in at least one election campaign near you if you can find somebody who's worth helping in that process. But if you also, if you're not and you can't find anybody, but you're not comfortable working on the elections, you can take one of these tools and one of these skills that I teach people how to use and apply them pretty much evergreen all the time, year round. You don't need an election and you don't need permission. It's just to give you the skills so that you can find something there that fits your passion and your interests, and it should make you a more effective activist. I plan on doing as many of these as I can. The best way to do that is usually, if we're going to do it on a weekend, I need about 5 hours to go through it completely. It's very interactive. When I say that, I try to get at least 40 to 100 people or so together so that you can interact and network with other people, because part of what I teach is to create a team. Activists are always going to be stronger as a team. Nobody's an island into themselves. They're going to have a team in order to be effective. The other thing is I can do them on weekday nights. It makes for a long evening. In a way, I'd kind of prefer that, but just so that I can save up a little bit of time with the family on the weekends. But you just let me know if you can organize 40 or more people in your community, and you can find a venue that we can use, and preferably one at low cost or no cost, then I'd be happy to come out and do that for you. And just let me know. We just got to coordinate at a time. So I do them all over Washington State, and I'm happy to help as much as possible. That's funny. Let me see. We're already back here. Who could prosecute Inslee? Okay, this is interesting. This is a question from Bill. Who could prosecute Inslee for his lawbreaking? Well, there's a lot of people who could prosecute Inslee. The question is who actually would. Technically, the Attorney General could certainly go after Inslee for lawbreaking or breaking the law. Under certain circumstances, the Washington State Executive Ethics Board could go after Inslee if there's a specific ethics violation. I know I've got a couple I want to file on him, and I just want to see what they do. I wouldn't put a lot of stock or plan that they would do something big. He did appoint everybody on that board, but it's still interesting to see how they would respond to some of his ethics violations. Some of you who've been following what I've done know that the Public Disclosure Commission can investigate Inslee for sure, and they've filed complaints against him. Or I should say I filed complaints against him that they've investigated, and they found him guilty of committing breaking campaign finance laws, and sent him an official warning notice, which that may not sound like much, but the truth is they've never sent a formal warning notice to any governor before and so that's at least some level of a wrist slap on the governor, and I found that to be a good use of time. In fact, I filed that complaint against him at a activist training session on November 21st up in Marysville. So if you come to these training sessions, I'll file live PDC complaints, and you get to see everything in action, see it happen, and then you never know where it goes after that, but some of them do get actually stuck with it. Okay, here's a question from Shatona here. Glenn, is it possible for Washington to turn red, or is it way too late? It is not too late, not at all, actually. Washington could definitely be red, and Washington could, now, it kind of depends on how you define that, but as far as taking over the legislature, for sure, both House and Senate, in my opinion, are up for grabs. And they're up for grabs, of course. That still requires the Republicans, because you're going to really have a two-party face-off. You don't really have third-party candidates generally in these races that make much of a difference. So it is up for grabs, and you're more likely to have Republicans get elected in seats in which there's a collapse in support for the Democrat candidate. The other benefit the Republicans have, assuming they can get their act together and have good candidates, you still have to have good candidates, is that some of these Democrat legislators are just goofy clowns. They're just totally unserious people, or they're exceptionally, let's just say they're not the smartest people in the world, and they've just made some incredibly stupid decisions. When I travel around the state, I especially in the kind of Snohomish through Pierce County area, more urban areas or the suburban areas there, one of the biggest things that people are telling me who maybe 12 months ago wouldn't have been involved in politics at all, or they were a Democrat 12 months ago or even 6 months ago, and they've crossed over and become an activist now. So they're conservative activists for all intents and purposes. And they tell me that the three things that you can see that they're really frustrated about, this rapid escalation of crime. We're not at like Manhattan, New York City, 1991 sort of stats, but Washington State experiences significant increase in crime, all different kinds, all across the board. And it's not just murder or more violent crimes, but it's also a lot of like slashing tires, East Hill, Kent, that somebody deciding to go through and steal all the catalytic converters out of the parking lot, or breaking into your home, or just massive shoplifting rings. It's not just confined to Seattle. I mean, that may be how Seattle defines itself now, but it's really spread into all the surrounding communities. And so people who live there are very frustrated by that, and that is not a reasonable and normal way to expect people to live. And it's happened so quickly that I think the contrast is pretty dramatic. Most people can realize there was a time when I could walk out to the bus stop and not get harassed by a bunch of junkies or step on drug needles, and now I can't do that anymore. That's going to affect how you view community, and that generally is not going to reflect well on the incumbents. And in most of these cases, the incumbents are the Democrats who are in office right now. So I think that's something worth noting. The other thing and if you actually look at it, there's about 15 to 16 seats, legislative seats, that the Republicans, if they had their act together and they had the right candidates and did the right thing, they could probably swing those seats, even with our goofy election process we have now. They only need 8 to tie and 9 to have a majority in the House. And for all the people who complain about the differences between, some of the problems in the Republicans that are in office, I'll share those concerns too. But it does make a difference based on just the voting pattern that we've seen in this legislative cycle. On many times, the Republicans certainly voted against a lot of really stupid, bad bills in a block. There were no defections. Nobody broke away on most of these votes. And so there is a difference. There actually is a difference when they get into office. You still need good people to run for office. And so it's very important that you recruit and get good people early. Don't wait till the last minute. Filing week is not the time to decide you're suddenly going to have Jesus is going to come down from heaven and tell you to run for office that day. That's not usually the best way to run a campaign and a way to be successful. So I would just make sure that you be a little bit more organized if you're going to help somebody run for office. Which kind of reminds me, too, I want to point out there's a great website that everybody who's looking at this should try to become more familiar with, and it's the Public Disclosure Commission website. I'm going to pop it up here real quick so you can see it. This is pdc.wa.gov, and everybody should be familiar with how to go to this website and look up information about political candidates. It's amazing what you can find here, and if you go back, it allows you to look at all the PACs at the parties. This is the homepage right here that you'll see. And it allows you to look up candidates by name. You can look up initiative campaigns. You can look up pretty much everything here. When I file my PDC complaints against politicians, this is an invaluable resource because I had to go here and find out what they've reported and whether they've reported it legally or not, or whether they've concealed stuff. And part of the research is just going to that website. So every activist should be familiar with it. And if you aren't now, get on it. If this is the first time you've ever heard about it, get on that site and start browsing around. You're going to be amazed at what you'll find out. One thing you're going to find out is who's actually decided to run for office, because filing week isn't officially until May. But if you've announced that you're going to run for office, you typically have to file with the Public Disclosure Commission within 2 weeks of that announcement under state law. RCW 4217A, you can look it up, and it takes a little while to sort through what those laws actually are, but they would have probably filed for it. If they haven't and they're running for office, you let me know, because I can definitely encourage the PDC to take a look at that campaign. That's a good place to go, though, and I really encourage you to look for it. So back to Shatona there. Yes, it's very possible for Washington State to turn red, and it's not way too late. It's not California. I mean, the reality is it's probably a lot redder than most people realize, but it does require good candidates to run for office, and you have to get out there and do a pretty good job. Here's another question. MDO 36, former state employee. Do you think Inslee will reverse the vaccine mandate for state employees like Kate Brown did? Now, that's a good question. That seems like a logical thing that Inslee would do, especially with Kate Brown doing it next door. I mean, Lockdown Brown is hardly the governor to emulate. So you know when she's actually doing something that's more rational than Inslee. Not that either one of them are terribly rational people, but at least you would think that the governor would. Inslee has a hard time thinking up unique thoughts for himself. So mostly he's a follower. So if he sees her do it, you'd think that's how he would go as well. So I would anticipate that he probably does do that. I don't know that means you get your job back if you were a fired state worker. The absurdity of how they've enforced the mandates with state workers is really unparalleled. I've never seen anything like this in state history before. Obviously, your union was useless and totally worthless when it came to something like this. But if you want your job back, who knows? You could apply and get in. I just don't know how that's going to work. But I would expect that he has to drop it. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Is there any chance we can get rid of the voting machines? This was a question by Christopher. It kind of depends on when you're talking about voting machines, whether you're talking. This ends up being a multi-part question. All right, is there any chance we can get rid of mail-in voting? That's one question that typically comes up. Is there any question to get rid of the ability for the machines to count the ballots when you get them and open them up and run them through? So the tabulators, presumably. And the answer to both of those at this point in time, short-term, no. Long-term, maybe a different question. I'm not sure that if there's just a simple tabulator machine, there's some value in that. I don't know if you've ever done election observing, but there's a lot of ballots coming in. What you want the ability to do is totally audit every single election at a pretty granular level in a way that if the machines aren't counting it correctly, that you can catch that. I mean, they've had tabulator machines for many, many decades before I was born. So it's not unusual that you have a machine there that counts the ballots. If there's a problem with it, though, and many of us feel like there's some significant concerns and problems the way the structure is set up now, you can always change the type of machine that's in there and get something that's going to work better. Now, the question of mail-in ballots is a little bit harder. Here's the funny thing is, I've looked at some recent survey data again, and despite all the drama that's popped out there, most people in Washington State, including Republicans, like the convenience of mail-in voting. Now, it's a much smaller percentage of Republicans that like that than Democrats. Democrats love it, of course, there's no limit. But there is a fairly sizable percentage of Republicans and even independents that like the convenience of mail-in voting. So if you're going to change mail-in voting, you're going to have to deal with the fact that a lot of people like it as convenience. And listen, I'm guilty of that. I remember back in the 90s when you first could sign up and vote as a permanent mail-in vote. I was one of those people who did it. I was traveling a lot at the time for work, and that was just an easier way for me to vote. I thought it was quite convenient at the time. Little did I know that a number of years later, everybody would be going with all mail-in voting. And I do believe that mail-in voting has a lot of problems and deficiencies with it, and we're going to have to come up with a way to fix and address those, because they do need to be addressed in the voting process. Let's see. But it won't be easy, and the hardest thing you're going to have to overcome is the fact that so many people actually like the convenience of mail-in voting. I'll talk something about here. I haven't really talked about this publicly so much, but I used to, when I would do activism training or help people running campaigns or something, try to help get them trained up as activists, I would go around and I would tell them, listen, as soon as you get your ballot in, fill it out and send it in. That was my original approach. And the theory behind that was that if you got your ballot right away, because mail-in voting, you have to send out the ballots early, so you got this 2 to 3 week window where these ballots are sitting out there. And a lot of people will fill a ballot out, set it on their car seat, and then just forget about it. This happened to me a couple times when I was younger. Then the ballot just sits there and you discover it, a month after the election. Well, it didn't do you any good to fill it out. You didn't send it in. So I would say, you're trying to get your own people to mail in the ballots as soon as you possibly can. I have changed my mind a little bit on that, and I'll tell you why. Originally, my idea was that, hey, you send it in, and your side will see it in the matchbacks, and they'll know that they don't need to doorbell your house anymore, or they don't need to send out any mail, and so therefore you make it more efficient for candidates who you would support to spend their time working on the other people who haven't sent in their ballots yet. That was my theory. The concern that I have is that with if you do that now, matchbacks are there for everybody to see. They'll know how many ballots came in, and most people are actually identified fairly well by party affiliation. They'll probably already know roughly. They won't know for sure, but they can have a pretty good idea of who you probably voted for. And some of these auditors' offices, even though they deny it, they still compile these ballots there, and I think they have a pretty good sense of which way an election's going. And that's not so good, because it gives people who would be more nefarious and dishonest the ability to get a sense of, hey, we've got to go out and acquire X number more votes. Now, you can do that legally by just looking at matchbacks and getting a sense, if you've done good voter ID, you can get a sense of how many you have to send in. But if you're concerned about bad actors doing that in bulk at the very end of an election cycle, like we've seen in Seattle, then your best bet is to hold on to your ballots and wait until the very last, I wouldn't say like the last day, but certainly the day before the last day, and hand deliver it. Don't try to trust the post office will get it there. Try to take it right down to a drop box. Not perfect. Believe me, I know all the deficiencies and problems exist in that system today, but that's certainly a better way of getting your ballot in and making it a little bit less likely that somebody who's playing the game in the matchback analysis that they're going to be waiting and trying to game it at the last minute. Let's see here. This is live. Somebody just asked me. This is live right now. So, Kim, if you just asked that question, yes, it is live. Let's see. Let's see. What are we saying here? Somebody decided to take away their question. That's great. Yeah, there is time to manipulate, and that's a great point. Cheating does happen in elections. I'm sorry to surprise everybody out there, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't vote. This does come up sometimes, and as somebody who's been organizing large numbers of people, canvassing the state, going through voter rolls and trying to clean them up and trying to do practical things that I think are going to make a difference in the election process, stuff that really does matter. It absolutely does. The most foolish thing you can say is, well, I'm just not going to vote anymore, because first of all, nobody cares if you don't vote in the sense of like some kind of protest. All that means is that's one less good vote out there that the other side has to overcome. So that doesn't make any sense. Secondly, it's not like you're sacrificing a huge amount to put your ballot in. Spend the 5 minutes or the 10 minutes, or if you really do your research, spend the 20 minutes actually filling out your ballot and just getting it sent in. At least, please do that. If you're for freedom and liberty. If you're a socialist watching this, that's okay. Don't vote. Your vote just won't count, so please don't send it in. But in all seriousness, if you're a liberty freedom guy and you care about voting, vote. I mean, and tell the other friends of yours who don't vote to vote, because there's plenty of elections that I've watched that are won by good people with just the narrowest of margins, and you'd be surprised at how many times it's that small amount that can make a big difference. And if every election was rigged, then many of these the elections wouldn't have gone the way they did. I have many of the same concerns of anybody who pays attention to elections and digs into this deep and knows where the problems are and that they have to be fixed. They definitely do. But despite the defective problems that we currently have in the election process, we can still get good people in there, and there has got to be a focus on fixing some of this stuff. Policy-wise, WAC-wise, which is Washington Administrative Code, and the statute for sure. We got to really, really fix a lot of problems here. Let's see, somebody's asking if it's live again. Somebody said it's not live. Have you ever requested, okay, this is a question from Leslie. Have you ever requested someone's non-subversive oath? Now, I am not sure what you mean by non-subversive. When I was elected to the school board, I signed the oath. There's an oath document. I plan to uphold I promise to uphold the Constitution, federal and state Constitution, and I remember signing an oath like that, and that is a document that should be publicly available. So I've asked for those before myself I think the last time I did it was in the Thurston County Commissioners, but I've done it in a few other places around the state. It's not that big of a deal. You should be able to get a copy of it. Ben, you're asking, is this Inslee's last term? Well, we don't have term limits in Washington State. We have term limits in some counties. For instance, Pierce County has term limits, but the state itself doesn't have term limits. So there's no official term limit for Governor Inslee. He is on his third term right now. I will point out, if you look at the PDC that I was telling you to look at earlier, you can see that Inslee has filed technically under the Public Disclosure Commission to run in 2024. I don't know that means he will, but he has filed for that. So he could technically run again. And so that's, we really do have a terrible governor. There's no doubt about it. They're carving away our gun rights. This is a question from Jamie. They're carving away our gun rights. How do we get them back? That's a great question, and the simple answer there is just get a couple more people in the legislature, and we can get them back. There's actually a bill that was proposed. I believe Representative Walsh proposed it, that actually reversed every stupid, dumb effort whether it's by initiative or by legislative bill over the last 10 years that have eroded some of the Second Amendment rights in our state. One bill like that could get through, and it would get every Republican vote in the State House and Senate today. And to my knowledge, it would get every vote of every candidate that I've ever met on the Republican side who'd be running. We don't have that many Democrats left that still care about the ability to defend yourself or protect yourself. So it would have to be a Republican. But if you get enough in there, yes, you can pass those through. And ultimately, that's what's going to happen. There's a question up here under, let's see, term limits. Oh, well, you could have term limits now, but I don't know that term limits is not the panacea that sometimes people think they would be. Because the challenge with term limits is that when you do have term limits, what it does is it does empower the bureaucracy. And bureaucrats are just as bad politicians. In fact, they're worse in many cases because they'll be there for decades sometimes, imposing their absurd and ridiculous approach to how they treat your freedom and liberties. They oftentimes, long time, especially senior level bureaucrats, view politicians as temporary obstacles in the road to perpetuate themselves, because the nature of bureaucracy is mostly to perpetuate itself. That's their whole goal and objective. And sometimes I say the definition of bureaucracy is really just a mountain of corruption concealed by an ocean of incompetence. But as cynical as that view may be, I only get more cynical the more records requests, the more I dig into most government agencies. So anywhere two or more bureaucrats are gathered, you're typically going to see that kind of bad behavior. So if you have term limits and it takes a little while for somebody to get into office and kind of get up to speed, they might be gone by the time they become much more effective at dealing with the bureaucracy. So that's just a potential downside of term limits. I would love to have term limits on bureaucrats, pretty substantial term limits, but even more significant than that, I'd much rather just take and downsize government substantially, because the reality is government does a ton of things poorly right now, and a lot more than they should, and that we need them to do. We just don't need government in all the places and all the ways that it's involved in our lives. Now, that's a philosophical view that I have of government, and that might be different than yours. But to talk to anybody who's had any interaction with government, they'll know the government is actually a terrible choice. They do everything poorly, nothing well, and super expensive, easy to be corrupted, and it's not a good way to do anything. So if you have a way of eliminating a government agency, I would take it. Getting rid of senior management, in particular government agencies, I would do it. Downsizing government should be one of the primary objectives for people who care about freedom and liberty. You shrink that side of the equation of the people who are actually taking away your freedoms and liberty, and it becomes a lot easier to prevail in the culture, in the politics, in every way possible. So I think that that's pretty big. There's a question here about the Spiffies and L&I situation by Brian. And I'm sorry, so let me read the question. Has there been any new information about the Spiffies L&I situation? Spiffies is a restaurant that was located down in Lewis County, and they were harassed by L&I, like a number of them. And there's actually two of them, and it's easy to get confused. Stuffies, which was down in Longview, and Spiffies, which was off of Highway 12 in Lewis County. I went to both places, and I believe Stuffies is still in court for sure. I'm not sure where Spiffies is. They did close down eventually after they were threatened with massive fines. Department of Labor and Industries demonstrating its true colors, and the fact that that's another agency that probably should be downsized. But they were the ones who took point on harassing Spiffies. I'm not sure the legal situation there. I just don't know the answer to that. But Stuffies, I believe, is still in court right now. Let's see. Let me look at this. Somebody here had a question. Yeah, Spiffies is now closed. But what I don't know is, even if Spiffies is closed, that doesn't mean that the lawsuit's gone away. So I don't know if they closed in order to have the lawsuit go away or what they did. So that's my not totally comprehensive answer to that at all. But I'd have to look into that a little bit more. But I know Stuffies is still in court, and they're fighting pretty hard. Let's see. That's funny. Maggie says, even if we had term limits, it wouldn't work. The office holder's spouse, child, or sibling would run in their place. Nothing would change. Actually, I don't think it works that way in Washington. I know that that's happened at the federal level a few times. But in Washington state, we've had situations where somebody's died in office. And when that happens, tough luck. It's usually the person running against them that wins. Although we've also had dead people elected to office, which has happened before when they've died. Ballots were sent out and then they died, and so basically the ballots came in and they still won. It happened at a legislative seat up in the 30th Ledge District up in Federal Way once. So that can happen. Let's see. How can we loosen Jay's tight grip on his emergency powers? Yeah, no kidding. I'm not sure where the bill, I know there was a proposal in the legislature that was going through, and I'm not actually sure where it's at right now. We're only a couple days away from the legislative session ending. So this is kind of like the witching hour, the last gasp of whatever's left in the legislature is kind of dying or coming through to some vote on at this point in time. And I don't know where that stands right now. That would be an interesting thing if they finally decided to take over and stand up for being representatives of the people. But the Democrats have kind of enjoyed this emergency powers, and that gave them the ability to kind of shift the blame to Inslee, but take advantage of pushing through stupid and terrible ideas in the legislative session. And so anyway, that's one of the things that I don't know about that right now. If they get through the legislative session and it's still there, then there's probably nothing real practical that they can do during the summer. But Inslee is probably going to recognize and be facing a pretty significant political defeat of all his, or of a good percentage of his allies. And even for Governor Inslee, that's probably going to matter to him here at some point. Legal lockboxes, illegal lock. Somebody says, please answer my question. I asked 4 times about the illegal lock boxes. Illegal lock boxes. Clarify what lock boxes you're talking about here so that I know what you're talking about there. And I'd be happy to try to answer that question. Here's a question. In a rainy place, did Inslee ever have to pay a fine for taking maggot-infested apples over to the apple maggot-free Eastern Washington? The answer to that is no, of course not. He didn't have to pay any fine at all. He's Governor Inslee, and he doesn't have to follow the law. And they gave him a wrist slap, if anything else. It's a Department of Agriculture violation there. It was funny. That's why he was getting the nickname of Maggot Man. So anyway, that was Inslee. He was not held accountable to that, although it gave us a lot of fodder to mock him, as we will do for the rest of his political existence on that one. Okay, so I'm sorry, there's getting so many questions here, guys. Term limits for governor? No. Do you predict any class action lawsuits against some of these agencies for the COVID mandates? This is a question from Dan. I would say that people probably want to file those class action lawsuits. I don't know. If you've ever been involved in a class action lawsuit, I've been involved in some before. You really have to have an attorney that really knows what they're doing, and they really have to lay out the process pretty well. The challenge with class actions is it takes a while. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a number of them filed. The question is, do you have an attorney, and really it's a legal team, skilled enough to prevail in a class action lawsuit? That's a more important question there. So we'll see what happens, but they should certainly have them. Let's see. Somebody asked, how can you become a ballot? Okay, old schooled. How can you become a ballot counter? That's a great question. Okay, how can you become a ballot counter? So you can become a ballot counter by being, ballot counter is probably the wrong term, because in most of the counties, in fact all of them, they have machines that essentially tabulate the ballots. They open up the ballots and then they go through a tabulating machine, and that's technically what's counting the machine. Now, so when you say ballot counter, that's probably not going to be you. You can go and get a job at most auditors' offices and apply before the election. They have temporary workers as well as some permanent ones, but most of it ends up being temporary, that they bring in, and they're the people, if you've ever seen where they open the envelopes and they're sorting out the envelopes down below, those are usually paid employees, but they're oftentimes temporary employees. They get training, and so you can apply to have a job like that. And I'd encourage you to do so. If you want to learn more about the elections process, go work at the auditor's office, please, or be an observer at least. But it'd be great if you get a job there and you could kind of work on the inside. I know we've got a lot of people who are doing that, and I think that's pretty important. Lock boxes. Okay, great. Somebody clarified. They're talking about the ballot deposit boxes being illegal. So, gosh, guys, I mean, here's the thing. You essentially have two bad choices when you have mail-in elections. One of the problems with mail-in elections. Either you trust the post office with your mail and you hand it to them, or you stick it in your mailbox and then hope that somewhere in the various process it doesn't get lost, changed, discarded, and maybe it gets to its final destination. Or you can drive to one of these lock boxes, and that's what they're referring to as a drop box that most of the counties have, and you can drop it in there, and theoretically the only people that have access to open that box are going to be employees who work for the auditor's office, and that's their job, and they come out and they open it, and they're supposed to put anti-tampering devices on the boxes and all that. And so those under state law are not illegal. Now, the biggest question, and really it applies in both these cases, is whether or not the chain of custody is appropriate for elections. And I would argue that in a mail-in voting situation, the chain of custody is a huge problem. It gets kind of thrown out the door. And when you have these elections right now, that's the biggest problem. I think it's one of the biggest problems that we're running into with mail-in voting. It's not the only one, trust me, I know. There's a bunch of them, but it's one that really stands out, and it's one of the reasons why I think it could be that there will end up being a federal move to eliminate mail-in voting as a significant option. There's a question here about Evergreen State College. I always like to talk about Evergreen State College. And it said if it's down 40%. Now I'm trying to find the question again. I saw it now. It's disappeared here. So there was a question is that if it's down 40%, there was something about Evergreen State College. Will you want to, is there a movement to shut it down? And the answer is there is a little bit of a movement to shut it down. It's kind of just destroying itself right now. And when something's self-immolating, it would be the kind of thing that there's not much more. You can't stop it. It's just going to keep destroying itself. If anybody bothers to Google Evergreen State College, they're not going to apply as a student for the most part. And as those things seem to shrink, then inevitably some sane person's going to get in and realize that you just have to put it out of its misery and shut it down. It may not be the only institution in the state like that, but it's certainly the first. And I know I'm just looking back here, so give me a sense of time, guys, because okay, we're at 45 right now? Okay, so we're at 45 minutes right now. I'm happy to go a little bit longer, but I don't want to bore everybody, although it doesn't seem... Yeah, this is great. This is one of the... here's an article that I wrote about this. But I've actually written a number of articles about Evergreen State College. I live in Thurston County, and so it's not that far away from me. So we're down here at about 45 minutes, which I'm probably going to wrap this up here in about 10 minutes. My friends are keeping me on the straight and narrow here, and you guys have had a lot of questions, and I don't think I'm getting to all of them. But let's see. Is there any election audit happening here? Great question. This is from Hess. Is there any election audit happening here? No, not in the way we would consider an audit. By the way, this is one problem that exists in our state law. There's no real formal definition of what a genuine forensic audit would be of an election. And one of the problems is, okay, you demand an audit, but it's undefined. Who's going to define it, okay? The exact people you don't want to define it, and who's going to actually do it. You can't have the Secretary of State audit themselves. That doesn't make any sense. It's like the IRS, I'm going to audit my own tax returns. Trust me, they're right. You can't do that. You're going to have somebody that is an outside third-party entity, and who's going to trust them? I have a high degree of skepticism, as almost any group coming in and doing the audit, and yet it needs to be done. I totally agree with that. So this is something we have to resolve as quickly as possible, is understand how to define it, understanding what it is exactly, what does it mean to have an audit, and then going out there and making that happen. Let's see, what is your thoughts on the magazine and Ghost? I hate the magazine ban. So Jason asked, what's your thoughts on the magazine and Ghost gun ban, and how it'll be enforced? I don't know how they're going to actually enforce the magazine ban. It seems to be unconstitutional based on Supreme Court rulings in this exact same issue recently. But it's a foolish and stupid payoff to the billionaires that funded the anti-gun effort, and they have. Nick Hanauer, Steve Ballmer, Bill Gates, and Bloomberg, the billionaires. An effort to restrict gun rights is not a grassroots movement in this state or anywhere else. It's just really an elitist sort of put pressure because they don't want you to be armed. They don't like the Second Amendment, and so they can always find ways. They have armed security guards all the time, right? They just don't want you to have it. So I think that's something that's pretty interesting. Listen, guys, there's a ton of questions still going, and I just want to kind of close this out because I know I'm coming down to the end here. I had a lot of people actually, I didn't know how this was going to work. We ended up having a lot more people commenting on this and watching live than I was expecting. So it makes me think that it's probably going to be worthwhile to do some more of these in the future. I don't know how many of these I can do, but I'll try to make sure I let people know in advance when they are. You guys had lots of questions here and a lot of interaction amongst yourselves in the question column here, or in the comment section. So I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time. I don't find myself that interesting, so if you do, I guess that means I probably need to do a little bit more of this. Just don't forget, if you're not subscribed right now, probably most of you are, but if you aren't, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get notified. I don't know how long YouTube will let me keep this channel, but as long as I do, I'll keep using it and getting out there and trying to share the truth far and wide. Fighting for liberty and freedom is worth any effort that we can and need to expend to restore it and retain it. And that means we have to play offense all the time. We can't play defense. That's not how you win. And I'm happy to help any group of activists that want to get a large enough group together. I'm happy to come out and help do any training that you might need, or help you with whatever program and project you're working on. It takes a little while to reach me sometimes. I am fairly busy right now. It doesn't make me an important person. It's that season, and people are really concerned and motivated to get more involved in the political process. So I'm happy to do another one, and we'll see. And yes, by the way, I saw that with the Rumble. I have a Rumble backup plan when YouTube takes me down, but this is a good way to reach out to as many people as possible. So that's it for tonight's live stream. If you want to learn more, go to my website, wethegovern.com. You can subscribe to an email program there. Whenever I do new articles, you'll get a notice. And I look forward to seeing you guys around. I know a lot of you are activists out there in the state, travel all around the state all the time, so good chance that we'll meet in person. And until then, just the other guy on the side of this camera, thank you for staying true to yourselves and this fight for freedom. So with that, I think we'll wrap up our first live stream, and we'll try to do it again next time. And by the way, for those of you who did have questions, I did hand these out at the Grit Rally this last weekend to anybody who had any good signs. This is his Ministry of COVID Compliance not approved, so I saw him right here. I did hand those out. So